The invitation came 2 days before Father's Day. A white envelope slipped into Walter Graham's mailbox, sandwiched between grocery store flyers and a lawn service ad. His name was handwritten in a script he didn't recognize, which was the first surprise. The second came when he opened it and saw Chloe's name in bold cursive. Please join Chloe and Matthew Walters for a Father's Day dinner celebration, Sunday at 7 p.m. Maison Bellevue. Walter blinked at the name of the restaurant, Maison Bellevue. That wasn't a dinner spot. It was the kind of place where menus didn't list prices, and water came in sparkling or imported still. He'd never set foot inside. Still, he couldn't help the flicker of warmth that rose in his chest. Chloe hadn't always been thoughtful, but maybe this was her way of extending an olive branch. Things between them had grown tense in recent years, ever since she married Matthew and moved into a different world entirely. Suddenly her speech had softened into elite polish. Her wardrobe glistened with designer tags, and her visits became shorter, more polite. But maybe, just maybe, this invitation was a step back towards something familiar. A gesture, a chance. Walter set the card on the kitchen table, poured himself a cup of black coffee, and stared at the steam curling up like a question mark. Sunday came quickly. Walter pulled out his best blazer, the navy one Ellen used to love, and pressed the sleeves smooth. The collar was a little loose around his neck now, but it still fit well enough to carry dignity. He polished his shoes until the leather caught the porch light. Maison Bellevue glowed like a glass palace under the early evening sky. The valet gave him a half smile when he pulled up in his 10-year-old Ford. Inside, everything was white linen, low chandeliers, and voices that hummed with money. A young woman in black approached him with a practiced smile. "Name? Walter Graham," he said, gently adjusting his blazer. Her eyes flickered down to the list, then up again. "Ah. Table 9. She led him toward a long table already crowded with guests, all in sleek suits, shimmering gowns, crystal glasses in hand. Chloe sat near the center, perfectly poised, her blonde hair swept into a bun. Matthew stood to greet him. "Walter, glad you could make it." Chloe didn't rise. She gave him a tight smile. "Hi, Dad. Didn't know you'd be able to make it on such short notice." Walter paused mid-step. "I got the invitation Thursday." She tilted her head. "Oh, Matthew must have mailed it. It was more of a formality anyway." That word landed like a stone in his stomach. Formality? He sat, quietly folding his hands in his lap as servers began pouring wine. The others at the table chatted around him. Names he didn't know, careers he couldn't relate to. Chloe didn't introduce him to anyone, didn't mention he was her father. When he tried to speak, she glanced at her phone. When dessert was served, she leaned over and asked a guest 2 seats down if they'd seen the vineyard in Tuscany her in-laws had just bought. Walter stirred the melting vanilla bean ice cream in his dish. His heart wasn't broken. It had already cracked long ago. But tonight she'd driven a wedge deep enough that something in him finally shifted. He excused himself just before the check arrived, stood quietly, and walked toward the reception desk. The maître d' turned, recognizing him instantly. "Mr. Graham," he said warmly, "I was hoping I'd see you again. My son made honor roll this year, still using the study tips you gave him when he was struggling." Walter smiled gently. "I'm glad. Listen, I need a small favor." As he stepped out into the cool night air, Walter didn't look back at the glowing windows of Maison Bellevue. He simply pulled the car door shut behind him and whispered, "Let's see how well Chloe handles the truth when it's served with the bill." The next morning, Chloe was already agitated. She had been scrolling through her phone, lips tight, eyes flicking across her inbox. Her espresso sat untouched on the marble counter. Matthew wandered in from the home gym, towel draped over his shoulder, fresh sweat still gleaming on his temples. "Everything all right?" he asked, grabbing a protein bar. She didn't answer immediately. Then, "The restaurant hasn't sent the receipt." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "We prepaid for the dinner, didn't we?" Chloe huffed. Only for the reservation. The rest was to be billed after. I told the server to charge it to our tab. He nodded and opened his water bottle. They'll send it. Maybe give them a day. But Chloe's gut told her something was off. She had planned the dinner meticulously, not out of love for her father, but to showcase her curated life. The old man had never been elegant, never been sharp enough to belong in her world. She had invited him only to quiet her conscience and impress her in-laws. But instead of feeling virtuous, she now felt exposed across town. Walter was in his backyard garden, clipping the dead heads off his roses. The morning sun was kind on his back. Hummingbirds flitted near the feeder, and the quiet hum of the neighborhood made the ache in his joints feel tolerable. He had received a voicemail earlier, a nervous, rehearsed one from Chloe, asking if he had enjoyed the dinner and whether he might have seen the receipt. He hadn't returned the call, not because he was angry. He wasn't. He was done. Back at Maison Bellevue, a different conversation was taking place. "Sir," said the maitre discreetly, addressing the head waiter near the kitchen, "do you recall Mr. Graham's request?" The waiter, a lean man with salt at his temples, gave a small nod. Of course, everything was handled. He asked that the bill be delivered directly to Miss Chloe Walters, with the note, and the chef instructed to keep it off the house tab. Per Mr. Graham's request, full charge, no family discount. The maitre d' gave a slow smile. "Well, let's make sure it arrives this afternoon." Personally delivered. At exactly 3:42 p.m., Chloe opened her front door to find a sharply dressed courier holding a Maison Bellevue envelope. Delivery for Mrs. Walters. She took it with a flicker of confusion, thanked him, and closed the door. Inside, she sliced it open, expecting a receipt summary, maybe even a loyalty thank you. Instead, what fell into her hand was a neatly folded letter on embossed Bellevue paper, and a check-sized slip showing the entire evening's cost. $1,372. No tip included. And beneath it, in handwritten pen, "To the daughter who treated her father like an inconvenience. May this be the last time you forget who helped you rise. Dinner's on you, Dad." Chloe's throat went dry. She sank onto the velvet settee, fingers trembling slightly as she read the note again. Matthew walked by, pausing mid-step. "Everything okay?" She didn't answer, because for the first time in a long time, the silence around her wasn't elegant. It was suffocating. At home, Walter tucked a small black box back into the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was the original graduation letter Chloe had written him when she was 17, thanking him for always being there. He'd kept it for years, but tonight he didn't take it out. He just shut the drawer and left it there, because when someone rewrites their love in arrogance, sometimes the only answer is quiet removal. 2 days passed before Chloe mustered the nerve to call her father. The phone rang 5 times. No answer. She didn't leave a voicemail. Instead, she paced the kitchen, the slip from Maison Bellevue still folded neatly on the counter beside her. She had read the note over and over. The words weren't angry. They weren't loud, but they stung more because of how quietly they cut. Matthew, usually indifferent to her family drama, had asked again that morning, "Are you going to talk to him?" "I don't know," she murmured, and that bothered her more than she admitted. Walter was in his garage, sorting through old woodworking tools. The scent of sawdust clung to the air, warm and familiar. He ran his fingers over the edge of an old plane, one he used to carve Chloe's first rocking chair. She was only 2 then. Every time he sanded down a corner, she'd run in barefoot and ask, "Is it ready yet, Daddy?" Those memories still lived inside him. They hadn't died, but they had been buried under years of dismissiveness, years where Chloe traded warmth for polish, love for image. He still loved her. But love didn't mean standing in line to be humiliated. Later that evening, Walter sat by the window reading when a knock came at the door. It was Ethan, the restaurant's head waiter. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said with a respectful nod. Walter set his book aside. Not at all. Come in. They shared coffee in the living room, the kind where time stretches and old conversations find new breath. I just wanted to say that letter you asked me to deliver, Ethan said. That was something else. It reminded me of my father. Walter smiled faintly. Sometimes it's not about revenge. It's about drawing a line. Ethan nodded. She looked like someone who finally heard something real for the first time in years. There was a pause. Then Walter said, "Funny thing about silence, it echoes louder in the people who know they've done wrong." Meanwhile, Chloe stood in front of the vanity mirror in her walk-in closet. The dress she wore at the dinner hung to one side. Champagne silk, elegant, beautiful. But tonight, under the warm glow of the chandelier, she didn't feel elegant. She looked at herself for a long time, tried to recall the expression on her father's face that night. Not anger, not embarrassment, just a kind of quiet finality. She hadn't realized until now that he never even touched his dessert or spoken more than a few sentences. And yet somehow he'd left her with more weight than all the guests at the table combined. She picked up her phone, typed a message, deleted it, then sat in silence, the letter still whispering from the kitchen counter, because some apologies are easy to say, but others require becoming the kind of person who deserves to be forgiven. That Saturday, Walter pulled up weeds along the back fence, working slowly as the mid-morning sun pushed through the clouds. His hands were steady, though the soil clung stubbornly to the old roots below. It felt fitting, like everything he'd been thinking lately. You try so hard to build something lasting, a garden, a family, a name, but sometimes you don't see what's rotting underneath, until it rises to the surface. A voice called from across the fence. "Still trying to outwork time, huh, Walt?" He glanced up. It was Hank, his neighbor of 20 years, denim overalls, baseball cap, and a coffee mug with "Retired and Dangerous" written across the side. Walter chuckled. "If I sit too long, I start rusting." Hank leaned on the fence. "Heard about your dinner downtown. Carol's cousin works at that place." Walter nodded slowly. "Word travels fast. She said you left before the check and the air turned heavy." Walter simply said, "Sometimes a quiet exit is louder than an argument." Hank gave a low whistle. "You always were the teach by example type." Walter looked down at the fresh dirt beneath his hands. "I just got tired of clapping for someone who never looked back." Back inside, he opened a worn photo album Ellen had put together during Chloe's high school years. There were snapshots of Chloe at dance recitals, birthday cakes, camping trips. One picture in particular caught his eye. Chloe sitting on his shoulders at the state fair, cotton candy in one hand, her other hand tangled in his hair as she laughed at the Ferris wheel. She used to love being near him. He had built her world, paid off her college loans, co-signed for her first condo, helped with the down payment on the home she now decorated with French chandeliers and vintage wines. And yet, the moment she felt she'd leveled up, she trimmed the roots, hid him behind polite smiles and vague gestures. An accessory, not a father. Chloe, meanwhile, sat at brunch with friends from her yoga studio, but her mind wasn't there. She stirred her mimosa more than she drank it. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a reminder she'd set to call Dad, check on him. She silenced it. Something about seeing it in her own handwriting unsettled her. The idea of checking on him, like he was a patient in some emotional waiting room she visited when convenient. When she returned home, the air inside the house felt too crisp, too curated. Her heels echoed too loudly against the marble. She walked into the office and sat at her father's old desk, the one he gave her when she graduated. Still sturdy, still bearing the nick on the left side from when she banged her knee on it moving out of her dorm. She opened the top drawer and found the faded thank you card she once wrote him. "Dad, thank you for never missing a single parent night, for teaching me how to drive, for being patient with me when I didn't deserve it. You're the reason I dream big." She ran her finger across the ink, now slightly smudged. For a brief moment she wished she had invited him over instead of trying to parade him like a prop. Because when you lose someone emotionally, you don't always notice it until the silence starts answering back. Walter sat at his desk that afternoon with a ballpoint pen in hand and an open folder spread out in front of him. Inside was his estate plan, nothing extravagant, but built on decades of teaching, saving, and modest investing. A small house, a pension, and a few safe funds. It wasn't generational wealth, but it was enough to leave something meaningful behind. He had updated the documents only once since Ellen passed. Now he hovered over the beneficiary section with fresh eyes. The pen didn't tremble as he crossed out Chloe's name. Instead, he added a note beside the margin in clear block letters, to be reassigned upon further consideration. He wasn't doing it out of spite. He was doing it because legacy isn't just about blood. It's about memory. It's about who shows up for you when there's no applause. And right now, that wasn't Chloe. Across town, Chloe paced the edge of her garden patio, wine glass in hand. Her phone screen was still open to Walter's contact, her thumb hovering over the call button. She'd tried writing a message twice, deleted both. Part of her still wanted to believe this was just another overreaction on her dad's part, that he was being dramatic, overly sensitive, that maybe he didn't understand how people hosted formal dinners now. But that voice was quiet now. The louder one, the one in her chest, kept replaying the look on his face when he walked into that restaurant. Not confusion, not anger, just hurt, the kind of hurt that doesn't shout. The kind that simply stops trying. She set the glass down and sat beneath the pergola, the evening breeze stirring the hem of her silk blouse. What had she really gained by climbing the social ladder? She had friends who cared more about brunch photos than birthdays, a husband who viewed her parents as branding liabilities, and a father who now treated her with the same distance she once gave him. Worse, he was doing it with dignity. The next morning, Walter made his usual trip to the bakery down the street. "Morning, Mr. Graham," called Janin, the young woman behind the counter. She was the daughter of his former student, the one he helped pass junior history after 3 failed tries. "You keeping those lemon scones warm for me?" "Always," she grinned. He paid in cash, left a tip, and as he turned to go, Janin added, "Hey, my dad still talks about you. Said you're the reason he didn't drop out." Walter smiled faintly. He just needed someone to believe in him first. Outside, he sat on a park bench and tore a piece off the scone, watching the neighborhood kids run through the splash pad across the street. This, not fancy dinners or luxury homes, was where his pride lived now, not in what he gave away, but in who still remembered where it came from. The following week, Walter received a formal letter from his attorney, confirming the final changes to his estate. He placed the envelope in his filing drawer without opening it. He didn't need to read it to remember what it said. The truth wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the way he now slept, without heaviness on his chest. It was in how he no longer waited for Chloe's calls or hoped for a Sunday visit that never came. He had let go of the version of her he clung to, the little girl on his shoulders at the fair, and in doing so, he'd given himself something more valuable than forgiveness. Peace. Chloe, on the other hand, couldn't sleep. The note from the restaurant had nested in her mind like a splinter. She had begun replaying not just the dinner but years of smaller wounds she'd inflicted. The half-answered texts, the condescending tones, the forgotten birthdays. For someone who had spent her life collecting accolades and curating an image, she was now staring at the first crack in her perfect world. And that crack looked like the father who had stopped showing up to play the supporting role. A week later, Walter attended a local charity fundraiser for the school library. He donated old books and some of his time helping sort shelves. That night, the principal called him on stage and said a few kind words about his decades of service. He didn't expect applause, but he got it. As he stepped down, a young couple approached him. The man was holding a toddler, the woman visibly emotional. You probably don't remember me, the man said, but I was in your class 15 years ago. You gave me your copy of To Kill a Mockingbird when I couldn't afford the school one. I still have it. Walter shook his hand, surprised. The woman added, he named our son after you. His middle name is Graham. Walter's throat tightened. It wasn't money that built legacy. It wasn't dinners at Bellevue or polished appearances. It was moments like these, small, quiet imprints that outlived memory. The final piece of his estate went to print the next day. Chloe received a letter by courier, much like the one she'd received after dinner, but heavier in tone. Chloe, I want you to know this isn't about revenge. It's about understanding what value means. You grew up thinking love was something to be displayed, curated. I taught you love was something to be lived, quietly and without receipt. You turned away from that version of me. So I've turned my legacy toward those who still recognize it. You will receive what's left of the house, but not the home. You'll see your name in the papers, but not in the will's heart. You chose your image. I chose my peace. Dad, the next time Chloe called, Walter didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had already spoken, with a bill, with a signature, with a silence that now rang louder than her apologies. And in that silence, Walter Graham found the one thing that his daughter's world could never purchase: self-respect and a legacy that wouldn't beg to be remembered.